Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. It took us a full year, but we finally managed to push 2020 into the history books and make way for what we all hope is going to be a much better year. So before we turn the page, let's try to analyze what 2020 meant for this region and this nation as we look from Jerusalem, the state of Israel. Joining us for this roundup from a community in central Israel is Ambassador Dani Ayalon, who is Israel's former deputy foreign minister and ambassador to the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also joining us from another location in central Israel is Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the vice president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a lecturer at Shalem College in Jerusalem. Thank you for joining us as well.
Good way to start the year.
Indeed. And Mr. Oren, thank you for joining us here on the panel, our TV7 analyst, Amir Oren. And I'd like to provide today a short recap. And to start with things, let's focus initially on Israel proper. Where does Israel stand in 2020 with an outlook to 2021?
So if there's one lesson we should all learn in all modesty here at the very heart of the land of prophets is that we cannot predict the future. Looking back a year ago, none of us could have foretold that this is how 2020 will unfold with COVID-19, which hit us in 20. And therefore, one could say that we all have proven to be very vulnerable, very fragile, but that there was also some upside to that, in that there was less of a conflict for Israel around it. If one looks at the various fronts, most of them were relatively quiet, definitely more quiet than in usual years. But mankind itself felt the tremors. Globalization is not what it was advertised to be. Each nation found itself having to lock down and sometimes close its airports. Israel certainly did. And when all of that happened, in a year which started with the killing of Qasem Soleimani and ended with the certification of President-elect Joe Biden as the next chief executive of the United States, Israel was in a political turmoil in which it is still struggling as we speak now. So looking ahead to the next 364 days of 2021, we will probably see the juxtaposition of these three phenomena: the political problem that Israel is involved with, the coronavirus, which Israel is struggling with health-wise as well as economy-wise, and the security situation, which will, of course, be influenced by the American-Iranian relationship along with others.
Ambassador Ayalon, I'd like to ask you the same. Israel, on a diplomatic level, where does Israel stand? Of course, it's been a year of breakthrough with regard to Muslim-majority states, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Of course, Morocco and Sudan are also in this equation. But where did Israel actually secure its position within the League of Nations? And is this now going to continue into a trend of 2021?
Well, Jonathan, there's no doubt that geopolitically and from a strategic outlook, Israel is much stronger today than it was in the beginning of the year. And this is mostly because on the behest of all the peace and normalization agreement with many of these Arab countries. I believe this trend will continue. And I'm sure that the administration of President Biden will push for that, as it is also the United States' interest to get here more stability, more predictability, and also to isolate Iran. Now, there is no doubt that Biden is going to go back to the agreement, the JCPOA, but hopefully this will be with stringency attached, and Iran will have to give up a lot of the very strong positions, intransigence positions that it had in 2015.
Indeed. Dr. Lerman, I'd like to ask you on a strategic intelligence perspective of the situation. There were various situations that occurred surrounding Israel, also most notably the continued struggle with the Lebanese Shiite organization Hezbollah, the various Shiite-backed militias, and also Sunni, if we're talking about Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip, which are directed by Iran, that still pose a significant challenge for Israel. Then we have also in Syria repeated attacks, some of which Israel was willing to accept responsibility for, others less so. Give us a little bit of previous 2020, how was Israel on the security lines, and what are the projections for 2021?
Actually, 2020, in terms of casualties in combat and terror, was one of the best years in Israeli memory. It's paradoxical, of course. We are not going to remember this year fondly. We lost more than 3,000 lives to the virus. But in terms of life, and the year ended with a horrendous act of what appears to have been a terrorist murder of an individual, of a woman. But overall, you're looking at the numbers. This was a year in which we have reached some kind of a bizarre modus vivendi with the powers that be in Gaza, what the UN calls the de facto government of Hamas in Gaza under Hessen, who understood that they cannot cope with the corona crisis without some kind of Israeli help and some kind of permission by Israel for Qatari money and so on to come into Gaza. And that has procured for us a period of not without incidents, but very minor incidents and very, very low level of actual violence directed at the Israeli people. The main ongoing conflict was indeed with Iran in Syria, and some would say beyond. And I should say this was also the year in which the cyber war has escalated and continues to escalate, and this is fast becoming a fact of life that we all need to cope with in the context of the rivalry with Iran. And with the Iranians increasingly breaching all the remaining limitations under the JCPOA, 2020 will be remembered as the year that set up the great drama of 2021, which lies ahead. Will the Biden administration be able to impose restraints on Iran's nuclear program, or shall we see a further destabilization and perhaps open conflict in the region? I would also say that you mentioned that, as Ambassador Ayalon mentioned, that all of this has led to a breakthrough, an unprecedented breakthrough, in bringing into the open what I've been calling for years the camp of stability and its inherent commonalities. Israel, the Gulf states, Egypt, Jordan, now Morocco joining in overtly, others less overtly, and all of this in the context of two challenges, the Iranian and that of the Turkey's neo-Ottomanism, about which we have often discussed in the previous year.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to expand on what Dr. Lerman has said, and also Ambassador Ayalon. The Iranian front, of course, is a significant challenge for the state of Israel. It doesn't seem to diminish in 2021 with the projections ahead. Nevertheless, we do hear from the Iranian regime speaking about its adamant resolve to thwart any options for the West to renegotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of 2015. Nevertheless, we do hear the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Grossi come out and say within the current capacity of Iran, within the realm of its nuclear development and project, there is no alternative but to renegotiate such a deal. Are we expected to see somewhat of a continuity of 2020 from a Trump administration into a Biden administration, still confronting such a deal, or are we going to see some kind of rapprochement with the aspirations of renegotiating something subtle?
Well, there are two levels here regarding your question. One is the amalgam of substance or evidence and image. Threshold states such as North Korea some 25 years ago and Iran more recently want to project their proximity to the bomb. It is not as if they were caught with their hands in the cookie jar. They want the world to know that they are getting close and that if they are not going to be paid the right price, they might inch even closer or even cross the threshold. So what you just cited from the IAEA chief Grossi, in fact, adheres to the Iranian playbook. They want the world to be aware that the world, the West, the powers negotiating the JCPOA 5-6 years ago should now renegotiate. On another level, we have the problem of domestic politics and the stabilization of governments in three places. First of all, in Washington. In 4 or 5 days, we will know the results of the senatorial runoffs in Georgia. We will know whether the Democrats will have the majority in the Senate with the vote of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, or whether the Republicans will keep control of the Senate. This will change the tenor of the next at least 2 years until the midterm elections of November 2022. If Biden gets control of all three power centers, the executive, the Senate, and the House, he will be able to assemble not only the team of his liking, but also the policy. Next, you may have elections in Israel. We will know that shortly. And then in June, you have the elections in Iran. So the first half of the year may be spent by jockeying for power, and within Israel, our two guests were members of the administration when Sharon was in power, when Peres was calling some of the shots, when Olmert and when Netanyahu. And it changes the relationship between the political echelon and the high echelon of the military and the security services and the foreign ministry. So we may or may not have unity of effort between the politicians and the generals, or we may have another discord, the sort of which we found out.
Ambassador Ayalon, on the Iranian front?
Well, there's no doubt that the Iranians will, I would say, they will try to raise the ante, if I may say so, as a defense mechanism against any pressure from the Biden administration, because right now there's no secret that the Biden administration is, or the coming administration, is trying to devise a very sophisticated, I would say, policy towards Iran. On the one hand, they would like to resume the JCPOA, but at the same time, they would like it on better conditions. There is a lot of pressure, and I think this time Israel is in a better position because we have a critical mass of pressure where Israel is not alone, where the Saudis, the Gulf countries, Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan will join Israel in pushing the United States to actually have much tougher JCPOA or a new JCPOA. The Iranians, of course, as a countermeasure in the bizarre, I would say, politics of the Middle East, will also make it harder. And at the same time, and this is where the crux of I think the matter is, at the same time, the Iranians will try to keep pushing the envelope, whether it's in Fordow, whether it's in Natanz, which they're getting more and more capabilities to position themselves in much better situation.
Indeed.
That may raise the risk for the region, and this may push Israel to be much more belligerent. So I think Iran will be the main tension point in the region and in the world.
Dr. Lerman, on the defensive front, if Iran continues to make significant strides towards a nuclear weapon, and Israel views the military option as the last result, do you think that all the options remain on the table at this stage, or is there still some progress between the diplomatic front to soft power, maybe some smart power in addition, or are we seeing a certain scale back on the confrontation on the field?
Well, there probably is a path to a diplomatic solution, but it depends on two major things. One is for the Biden administration to keep the very significant cards, very strong cards they have, the immense economic pressure on Iran, at hand until the Iranians actually deliver on, first of all, their rolling back to the commitments under the JCPOA, and secondly, accepting that the negotiation will be about, let's call it a JCPOA plus, and specifically putting the sunset clauses as far into the future as possible, or none at all. That was the most damaging, the most destructive element of the JCPOA, the fact that the entire system of limitations will expire soon, and that has to go. But in order for it to be undone, there needs to be immense leverage on Iran. Mm-hmm. And the second element that must be there, and you're right, is to have a credible military threat. I can almost, shorthand the CMT. A credible military threat is a vital element, a necessary element in not only for Israel, because we don't know, negotiations could also fail and we may have to face the need to act, but they are also of great importance for an American administration, both directly vis-a-vis Iran and also indirectly in rounding up support from the rest of the international community, because the Russians, the Chinese, the people in Europe who shy away from taking serious measures vis-a-vis Iran, all should be made to understand that the choice is not between the present situation and tough resumption or continuation of sanctions until there is a good agreement. The choice is between that and war, between a hard line and war. And having that hanging over the entire situation actually could bring us to a successful outcome. In fact, this was exactly the strategy of the Obama administration during its first term of office. And I should say, when Hillary Clinton, in a very tough manner, shepherded the relevant UN resolutions. This was all frittered away at the negotiating table by John Kerry and his team is a sad story, but it does not have to repeat itself under Biden.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, I'd like to move on to the next front that was widely discussed during 2020, the Eastern Mediterranean. We had various developments there, including Turkish EEZ agreements with Libya, then an EEZ agreement between Greece and Egypt. Then we saw different altercations that didn't immediately deteriorate into a military confrontation, but much rhetoric going back and forth between Europe and Turkey. Israel is, of course, in the middle of all of this, speaking about the Eastern Mediterranean Pipeline Agreement, the East Mediterranean Forum, which Israel, of course, has a very significant stake in. Where do we stand in 2020, and what are the projections for 2021?
You can look at it either top-down or bottom-up. Top-down, looking from the global strategic level, peering into the Mediterranean. And the most important fact is that Biden is going to reinvigorate the alliance with the Europeans within NATO, and because Biden and his administration would like to find common ground with Europe, it will have an impact on their regional policy, but Europe itself will have to put its house in order, because, for instance, vis-à-vis Libya, France and Italy are at loggerheads. Each supports another party in the conflict. And the wild card is Erdogan. We don't know whether Biden and Erdogan will have a truce. Coming into office, it doesn't look like that, but enemies sometimes become, if not friends, at least partners in an armistice. And everything we are saying now is premised on all other things being equal. We are talking as if we know whether the regimes will stay. For instance, in the Palestinian community, whether Mahmoud Abbas will survive the year, or whether in Syria, which is very germane to your question, whether the Russians will impose some sort of an Assadist peace. If they do, Russia will become a major power in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Indeed. Ambassador Ayalon, I'd like to ask you on this front, on a diplomatic level, of course, to what degree do you see the current situation in the Eastern Mediterranean evolve? Also considering the fact that it's not only the Israeli lobby that is currently working extensively in Washington in order to secure its national security interests, but also the Greek one, which is not less weak when we're talking about the Democratic Party in particular. The Greek lobby in Washington is quite significant and could pose Turkey many challenges in 2021. How do you see this actually develop?
Well, Jonathan, just as Israel emerged much stronger on its southern flank with all the new alliances that we have with the Gulf countries and more, also on our western front, we are much stronger today with much deeper collaborations and cooperation with Cyprus and Greece. In that respect, this is going to be a almost an iron wall against any expansion that Erdogan and Turkey might try to do, as we mentioned. I think that this may also strengthen Israel's hand when in the negotiation on the economic water negotiation with Lebanon. And to that extent of Israel being much tougher on this front, Israel was very glad to expose its new vessels that we received from Germany, which has a dual purpose. First of all, to help defending our, of course, installation, our gas installation in the Middle East, in Tamar and Leviathan, but also as a way to deter Turkey or any other foreign and adverse forces. So I think here there will have to be some kind of intervention from the superpowers, whether it's the United States or even Russia, that can curb, on the one hand, Turkey's dangerous policies, and on the other hand, try to negotiate some kind of a modus vivendi in this region of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Dr. Lerman, you have less than 2 minutes for your analysis.
Two very important elements in 2020, because the relationship with Greece and Cyprus has been built up already in earlier years. But what we saw now, first of all, the closer relationship with Egypt, at least at the presidential level, at the leadership level. The people of Egypt still have serious gaps in their understanding of Israel. But at the leadership level, we saw Egypt welcome the Abraham Agreement, welcome the Moroccan breakthrough, increasingly looking to Israel as an ally in the Eastern Mediterranean, and of course the final establishment of the EMGF, the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, as a internationally recognized regional organization. This is an amazing development. By the way, it includes the Palestinians. Amidst all the crisis with the Palestinians, here we are sitting at the same table together in a regional structure. The second element, which is new, is the intervention of France, quite forcefully, in support of the Egyptian position, in support of the Greek position. It links up with the debate on the future of the struggle against Islamism, which Erdogan supports in some fashion, and Macron has positioned himself. Of course, at the end of the year, he was struggling with the coronavirus personally, but politically, he has positioned himself alongside Sisi and others in the struggle to beat back the virulent, let's say, intellectual virus of Islamism within the Muslim communities in the region and in the diaspora.
We will have to wait for 2021, or at least to see the future, which has started today. But I'd like to thank all of you, Dr. Lerman, Ambassador Ayalon, and Mr. Oren for joining me in today's panel. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well. Have a happy new year, and we will see you again next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.